am really so pleased today to have Amy Gilman from the Chazen Museum of Art at the University of Wisconsin and John Weber at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art at the University of Oregon to join me in a conversation about what COVID-19 has meant at their institutions. Please join with me as we listen to what they have to say about this experience. So, John, give us a bit of your bio and then Amy.
Started out as an artist long ago in Portland, Oregon, and started curating and was the curator of contemporary art at the Portland Art Museum, and then went to San Francisco as the curator of education and public programs. I was there 1993 to 2004, a really exciting time, and then moved to the Tang Museum. That was my first academic museum, the Tang, Francis Young Tang Teaching Museum and Art Gallery at Skidmore College. Spent 8 years there, and then about 6.5 as the founding director of an innovative thing called the Institute of the Arts and Sciences, a very interdisciplinary thing at UC Santa Cruz. And then came here back to Oregon, where I'm originally from, at the very end of September of 2019.
Amy.
Amy Gilman. I'm the director at the Chazen Museum at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I have been here since September 2017. Prior to coming here, I spent 12 years at the Toledo Museum of Art, started there as the curator of contemporary art, eventually ending as the deputy director shortly before I left that position. And probably one of the more important things it has turned out in my background to being a museum director of a university art museum is that I didn't come, like John here, I actually didn't come from an art history background originally. So my undergraduate degree is in performance. My first graduate degree is an MFA in photography. And then it really wasn't until I actually got into the PhD that I really delved into the art history part, which makes, I think, being on a university campus where there's all these multidisciplinary things that are happening all the time. Actually, it's really useful background to have. It wasn't intentional, certainly on my part. I'm probably on John's too, that we would end up in these places, but it's actually been really beneficial.
So now it's a time to really ask you how you're thinking differently about a number of issues that are going to obviously have and are going to continue to impact you. And I guess I would really like you to just think as broadly about this as you can. And the first one is about how you're thinking about communication with your staff, with your advisory boards, with your students, with your faculty, with the community at large. How are you changing that relationship?
I suspect that, like every museum in the country, certainly like every nonprofit in the country, we're trying to engage all of our stakeholders online in various capacity. We obviously that started almost right away, but we actually were pretty slow out the gate in accelerating online content, because it felt to me like there was a big rush to get the only way we can reach visitors right now is through online content. So we're just going to start throwing spaghetti at the wall, right? We're going to give you so much. And we just, that felt like very, it's very hard to produce things that are actually rich and have depth to them, especially at smaller, less resourced institutions. And so we actually took a little bit of time to really think about, okay, what's the cadence? What are we going to do that will feel like, for one example, public programming, right, in a virtual space, but something that is super Chazen specific, right? So it's something that not that only we could do it, but that we're doing something, for example, that's just called our kind of happy hour. And we actually are now having artists in their studios doing Facebook Live events. And we may very well continue this, post-COVID, right? Because it actually turns out it's a great way of connecting with people and featuring artists and doing things. And we wouldn't have done that in the beginning, right? We had to actually shift our thinking and reimagine public programming in this kind of space.
That sounds really interesting, and I would love to see some of that. John, what have you started with communication?
We actually we're lucky because we had already a staff on hand with a lot of production capacity.
Mm.
We have a website that is direly in need of updating. And then when I came here, one of the things I asked for in support was some help in doing that. And we've had some discussions with a programming firm about that. But despite that, we've been able to put up on our website very quickly quite a number of very elegant, different kinds of things. And we're using, they range from like things called a minute exhibit, which are quick video walkthroughs of shows that often complemented by much longer walkthroughs with curators that we'd already shot and that we then got edited. So they're 40-minute, really in-depth walkthrough from a public program.
Mm-hmm.
And then these short ones. And our academic education staff has been producing, curatorial staff has been producing very rich study guides that faculty are using, simple PDFs that have links to videos and also links to other existing videos that are out there. And so we've got a section of the website for remote teaching and learning that's really very, very deep with a lot of, it's on, again, if you go to the website, you'll find it there.
It sounds like it's very robust. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, there's a lot there. And this has all been produced in-house quickly because we just have some great talent here and colleagues. One of the things that we're doing, though, is we're self-consciously trying to experiment with different formats and different ways of combining word and image. We're working on some big slideshows, some of which aren't even up there yet, that are bringing resources in different ways. And this is something I learned from my time at SF MoMA, where we had a big, very capable team doing interactive educational technologies. And early on back in the 90s, we were told by Larry Friedlander at Stanford, well, don't do everything the same way. Experiment and learn from different formats. Gather feedback, see what you like, see what faculty, in this case, see what faculty respond to, students respond to. And so at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art, which I should have said, that's where I am now at University of Oregon, we do work with a lot of faculty. We've had this year, including online, about over 340 academic visits to the museum, and we've served over 9,000 students. So we have a lot of engagement across the curriculum.
So, but let me ask you, that is unique to you, both of you, in terms of working with faculty and students, which is really, really important. But have you, as directors, reached out to the other community members in ways that you hadn't before? Amy, what is your experience of that?
Probably the best way to describe the situation at the Chazen is that, so even this is true now, and it was true pre-COVID, which is that partly because of where we are physically on the campus, is that we are literally at the border between campus and community. And because we have two buildings that are connected by a bridge, which goes over a pedestrian walkway, a pedestrian mall, like we are this space that that is both facing the university, and obviously that is core mission for us, is to really serve the university constituents, and also facing the community. And we had pre-COVID really thought a lot about increasing access, right? The idea of, and the most significant press that I've gotten since I started in this job was last September, when we radically changed the hours to the museum, and we were open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. 7 days a week. I mean, in the COVID, right, in the COVID era, that seems like, whoa, I can't even imagine us being open 1 hour a week right now. But now that move, right, was really important to our community. And by community, I am including Madison's, Madison community in that, and also the sort of social side of the university, right? So like John, we do a lot of things with faculty directly, and teaching and learning and sort of thinking about that. But also we are a space where we have a coffee shop, people gather with us. And so now we are really having to rethink what it means to be radically open, right? So before, I could say we're thinking about that, and we're testing out this idea that if you are open a great number of hours, that people will come, which, by the way, was actually working out. I mean, who knows what will happen when we actually reopen. But we were on track to more than double our attendance. The attendance doubling wasn't the goal, right? It was a side effect of being more open to the community. And now I'm thinking, okay, how can we take the same principles, right? The idea of being really open and accessible in a space where we are going to have a lot of physical constraints that we did not have before, right? And now it's very extreme, but we won't be in this extreme case forever, but we will be very constrained, right? We will be under a lot of constraints. And so everybody on staff is really having to pivot to thinking very differently about what it means to like draw people to the museum, to do all of that. And that's becoming a really interesting conversation over these last 8 weeks that we've been at home.
John, have you reached out? Have you reached out to your, donors and to your other members of the public and so forth in ways that are different than what you were doing?
Yeah, we have. We're actually doing, as I think a number of museums are. And by the way, Amy, I love the idea of those radically open hours and being open late when people who are after they're done with their jobs, and classes too, because students can't come.
Right.
Unless they come with a class, they certainly can't come regular hours. I love that. We were almost ready to launch a new kind of e-news platform just as this was happening. And so that ended up being just lucky timing. And it's very segmented. We have different audiences. We have one we send to our leadership council. We have one we send to our patrons council, which is about 100 donors that give a higher level of amount. And then another one we send to regular members. We have an education one we're sending to teachers, and also it's there for families. We're doing something called JSMA, Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art Creates, which are hands-on activities you can do at home. We've got students doing videos for them. We're going to do a happy hour tonight for our leadership council. It's like bring a glass of wine and your favorite story from stuff you're doing online. And we've done some things like that too, with where I get together maybe with a colleague and one of our donors, and I sit around here on my deck in Eugene. It's, you can see my window reflecting, and I've got a glass of red wine. This is iced coffee today, so it's warm here.
Good.
And we're trying those out, and they're a lot of fun. And we're doing some online things too with a program called Art Heals, where we work with patients doing art activities, and we're actually working with doctors on stress relieving art. These programs have been going on for about 3 years already, and so we've moved them online, and we're experimenting with those as a way to possibly scale them up and reach more people through a combination of recorded and live medium.
Well, both of you, do you think when it gets back to whatever normal is going to be, that you'll continue to do some of these things that you've moved online? Do you think, or do you think?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we were, I think, very much echoing what John just says. Like we had started thinking about a lot of things, right? We had started thinking about, I think, and part of what's happened now is that we no longer have the luxury of time being more like glacial, right? That we could make incremental change, right? Like that's done, right? We're done. And so now we just have to pull the trigger on some of these things that are actually, like in our case, that we had been discussing, or that we had been kind of going back and forth about, or that we had launched but hadn't like really embedded. And yeah, I anticipate that that many of the things that we're doing now online will continue, but I also think probably the biggest long-term effect, I suspect, will be the freeing up of everyone's thinking about what constitutes how you museum today, right? Which is, again, like we're being forced to do this under this really, really sort of awful circumstance. But it also is very freeing, because now we can really think about things that probably before would have seemed beyond the pale, right?
Right.
Um, and
Great.
so I'm actually interested in where that will go over time, right? And honestly, I think that one of the interesting things about being at a university art museum in this moment is that in the short time that I have been here, and I didn't come from a background in university art museums, so I didn't really come in with a lot of preconceived ideas about what we are supposed to be doing, is that university art museums are great places to pilot things.
I
Right?
agree.
They're great places to be able to do the kinds of things that John is talking about, like in experimenting and then iterating it and changing it. And you may be nested within a large bureaucracy that is itself has its own, politics and
Sure.
rigid silos or whatever. But the museums can be very nimble, I think, and that is
Yeah.
certainly my experience. And I honestly think it's easier for us to adjust that within this circumstance than some of the large civics are having to do. This like shift where you're literally moving the Titanic like in 8 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Over time. So I don't know, John, if that's similar to what you've been thinking.
When I went from SF MoMA to Skidmore College in the Tang, it was like I couldn't believe how fast we could do things at the Tang. It was so nimble. It was like this, race car Maserati thing. You could move really quickly, and it's been that way. The GSMA is a lot bigger than the Tang staff-wise, but we're still able to pivot on a dime when we want to. Very unlike what you have to do if you've got 300 staff and more layers there. Despite the considerable bureaucracy that a public research university has. And Oregon, U of O is, I think, very nimble for a big organization. Very, very well run, very well managed in terms of how it's dealing with the crisis. But within that, we can move even faster. And that's actually a lot of fun, and it's really cool. And so we can try things out. I won't say we try to make mistakes, but we can experiment without a fear of, well, that didn't go so well, because that's part of the research thing.
Right.
You have to try stuff out.
Yeah.
And if you disprove something, that can be as important as proving something. And people in universities understand that. And that's great. So, I think you were asking earlier, Diane, about what we'll do next. And one of the things that's been out there in the teaching community for some time is the notion of the hybrid classroom, and trying to blend some version of delivery when you have a brilliant lecturer, scientist, humanities scholar, and they're talking to 300 students. They don't need to necessarily do that in person, but what needs to happen in person, wants to happen in person, is that the dialogue between the students and the instructor, could be a grad student, could be the main faculty member, whatever, that live part has to be there. But one of the things I think we might be moving towards, certainly in this coming year, is really needing to implement that hybrid classroom notion. And so the materials that we're putting up online now are partly done in collaboration with faculty to experiment with precisely that kind of condition. I think we'll see more of that, even as we are able to open our doors and have much smaller groups of students coming in.
I want to ask you, when you think about exhibitions, programs, and partnerships, especially partnerships, what is that looking like to you both?
There are a number of things. I mean, I think this is a bit of a theme. There are a number of things that we had started that we are ramping up during this, right? So for example, now a little over a year ago, the directors of the Big Ten art museums got together for if it was not the first time, it was like the first time in a really, really long time.
When you say the Big Ten University?
The Big Ten University directors, right? So like many, not all, but many of the Big Ten universities have significant art museums, right?
Right.
I mean, like, and interestingly, many of them had actually had new directors within the last like 5 to 7 years. And indeed, in the same like month, myself, Penn State and University of Michigan started, like literally, like in the case of Penn State, she and I started on the same day. And so we had gotten together, and part of this was like with no agenda, right? We didn't really know where this might go. And I don't know where it will go next, but I do think that we're beginning to really talk about like, how do we help each other share resources? How do we help each other understand like ways of supporting each other as we're all beginning to think about things like, I don't know how complex it's going to be over the next couple of years to do loan shows, and the uncertainty. I mean, the uncertainty of having loans. Like, I mean, I'm sure there are many museums who have loans that are still in Europe, right, from back in March, and will be there until we can figure out how to safely get everybody back, right? I don't know how. I think that's going to be pretty complicated.
I think you're right.
And we are certainly getting very, very focused on how to leverage our permanent collection. And maybe instead of larger shows right now, maybe we engage like a single artist to come in and do an intervention or something, because that is something that we can pivot more nimbly if we end up in a situation where we have to close and then open again or something like that. Because it's one thing to close in an emergency, right? We all sort of basically had whatever days to figure it out, but it's another thing to project forward into the fall, and just like our colleges and universities are doing, we're all trying to figure out how to do that in a way that's a little bit more planned, if you will. Yeah, I don't know about you, John.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So, John, what about you? I mean, I know you have that incredible program where people send their pieces of work to your museum and so forth. Is that ongoing, or what do you
Yeah,
think?
that is, and we've been in touch with collectors, and they've been very supportive. And we think there'll be some slowdown there, but it's definitely going to continue. We have some ongoing partnerships that we're working on a show of 20th century Mexican prints with the Portland Art Museum. We're planning on continuing that. And we're doing a big, part of a big group with working with the Smithsonian on several large shows. And that's also, I think, is on track. As far as new partnerships, frankly, it's been a little hard to think about that the last, it feels like, what is it, 7 weeks now or something? And sometimes it's like dog years. It's like,
yes.
It seems like 5 times that long.
It's the longest spring ever.
Oh man. And these days of spending, 50 to 70% of your day on a video conference, it's exhausting. The partnerships that we're probably thinking the most about do have to do with teaching and working with faculty in slightly evolved ways, anticipating that the next year maybe we'll need to have a lot more of that, and then also trying to understand how we'll work with schools and teachers in the community, because we have a large K-12 engagement too. And we were just talking today in an all-staff meeting online about that, and about will our docents want to come back and work with groups.
So technology has taken front and center, in a sense, for the museums. Do you feel it's going to continue, and that you're going to have to beef up your staffs in technology, and that's going to be a big part of your future?
I don't know that I don't anticipate beefing up our staff necessarily. I do possibly see, and we've explored a little bit, whether we can shift some responsibilities around. We've realized that, there's some talent there we didn't understand, or at least like somebody's got programming talent that we didn't really realize was there, and maybe wants to work on that more. I mean, I've always been interested in the technology piece of it. Maybe I've almost stepped back from that in some ways, from thinking that it could do as much as it could do, but it's still been a real part of my museum DNA. And I'm really interested in it because you can talk to the artist and you can bring it back. Art today deals with sound and moving image in a way, and you can't represent that effectively. And now with the degree of, for better or worse, the penetration of social media in our culture, you can't not be there.
So you see it really being a major part of your future, even perhaps if COVID hadn't come along, but especially now. And
It was an
Amy,
area that certainly I
right,
wanted us to beef up in even more when I came. And I think the question is not doing it for its own sake, but
right.
keeping the content at the center and keeping the human interaction and trying to figure out are people actually using it? Are they liking it? And our new sort of e-news platform allows us to find out who opens up every single one and what they click on. And that's very useful.
I am in total agreement with John. There are, I think we were all headed in this direction, but one of the things I think will be really, potentially really clear is that we can move more communication through electronic platforms than people were willing to consider when you think about like the amount of print stuff that we continue to do. So like I personally love print things, and honestly I think that the print things will become more and more special, right? Like that you will devote more money to an individual thing. It will be more precious, right? Like we do a calendar every year. The first year I was here, the marketing person suggested this, and I was like, who does calendars anymore? Like who is going to do it? Is far and away our most popular thing that we do, right? Because it's this beautiful calendar. Everybody loves getting it every year. We give it to our members, we give it to community, etc. But I could see a significant dialing back of some of the other print media, because now actually we're going through this period where even the people who have been the most resistant to online interactions are now like sort of being forced to embrace it in a way. Like I think we may be at a tipping point with that, so that will probably have some long tail on that. But I also think, we in museums have spent a lot of time over the last couple decades talking about interactivity and on-site programming where people physically interact with each other and with things in our spaces. And in the short term, even when we're open again, like placing technology in our spaces and having people interact with that, or even some of the hands-on programming we do, is just going to have to change, right? So, we all have our like highly powerful computers, right, in our little hands all the time. And that is how people need to interact with us electronically, even I think when they're in our galleries now. Because we don't want to be responsible. I mean, I don't want to be responsible for trying to manage like how much we're going to have to clean something for people to feel safe to do touch screens in the computer in the museum, for example, right? Like I just feel like it's it is a losing battle there, whereas we're all if we can find other ways to connect to people, that seems to be the future, at least certainly in the short term.
I want to talk a little bit about finances because I would be irresponsible if I didn't ask you both about that. But then I guess at the end of this all, I would like to say, what do you, I mean, and you've certainly approached it. What are the biggest differences and how are you going to think differently about it? I mean, how is your thinking evolving? And we've touched on that a lot, so we don't have to belabor it, but would love some final words to other people. But financially, John, what's going on with the institution, and do you feel secure and so forth about the future?
I think in higher ed, the big issue, the big question has not been answered yet, and that's what's going to be fall enrollment. And until we know what fall enrollment is, I don't think any of us in the academic museum world really know exactly, let's just say, how tough it's going to be. We know it's going to be tough because it's already tough. Universities have already seen, they're losing revenue. They get a lot of revenue from dorms and from dining halls, and that's all just gone up in smoke this year.
Right.
International students, a lot of universities rely heavily on full tuition, state universities in particular, state full tuition paid, especially on the West Coast, with students who are coming from Asia, and good luck with that. So we know it's not going to be a cakewalk. On the other hand, the impact is slower to hit then it's hitting the what I call the downtown museums. They've already felt that they've furloughed huge amount of staff, and they've projected great degree of decline. We've made some projections about how much we expect our revenue to go down next year, and we do expect it to go down, and we're already taking some major steps to consolidate expenses and cut back, and doing some things that are going to save us, into six figures, because we know that it's not going to be an easy time. But in terms of the future, we won't really know. We get a good chunk of our budget. It's less than half, but that's a good chunk of our budget from an annual fund,
At the university.
money that comes from the university.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been declining in recent years, but we've been able to cope with it through private fundraising. We don't know where it will be at the moment. The university, I wouldn't say I'd say they're cautiously optimistic and really making a lot of very careful plans and doing really good planning. As I said before, I've been impressed with the way that's going here. But we won't know until October, quite frankly, Diane. That's when we can begin to answer that question meaningfully.
So you haven't had to furlough people at this point, have you? Or
we have not. And in fact, we kept our student gallery and front end staff going. We had money in the budget for them already, and we created a thing called Museum Students, Museum Stories, where they're creating messaging for our website and for social media. They're doing short videos. They started out by basically just writing about their experiences as students and how their museum experience as workers contributed to that. And we're using some of those as the basis. We grouped them up from that. And this is about close to 30 students or so. And so we thought it was really important to keep them employed. And some of the staff who'd been working on collections have shifted to some research tasks and other things. And so we haven't had to do what the downtown museums have done, and I feel good about that. But we do know that we're in a belt tightening period, and we're making very concrete plans for that.
Great. And Amy?
Yeah, so I think actually similar to what John is saying, I feel really proud of the work that UW-Madison has been doing in response to COVID, because I actually feel that they have been very, very thoughtful about this, about how they have approached it. Nothing is perfect, but like given the extraordinarily difficult circumstances, I feel like they have been very human about their response in terms of making sure that staff, have support, et cetera. They just recently announced a furlough package that is for the next 6 months. So that takes us to October, because I was going to say, I could just like put on repeat the thing that John just said about we really just don't know, right? For us, the big thing is coming. We just, for everybody else, it's like right now. And for us, it comes in the fall.
Yeah.
So the furlough package is tiered so that the highest paid people within the university, it's not just applying to the museum, the university takes 6 furlough days over the next 6 months. And then as you go down on the pay scale, you take fewer of those days, right? So that it's just a higher percentage, not a large percentage, but, and they've been very clear that this is the short-term fix and that they don't anticipate anything additional during this period, right? So like that's the thing that's going to get us to October, right? Because I think that they very smartly, and I feel this way too, like because we're not in a position to make decisions yet about what will inevitably happen, but I am starting to plan scenarios, right? So at the same time, the furloughs were being announced, the governor in Wisconsin announced that all state agencies, and this includes the University of Wisconsin system, were getting a 5% cut that was effective for this fiscal year. And that fiscal year ends at the end of June, right? So that's basically like the 5% cut comes now, right? And so that I think is a portent of the future, right? There are going to be cuts, and we're going to have to manage them. And I'm beginning to think very clearly about like, how can we thoughtfully make cuts without compromising mission? How can we prioritize the things that that we really need to focus on specifically about supporting teaching and learning and research at the university, right? So like really doubling down on the faculty and student engagement and support in exactly the things that John is describing, right? Like, so that, because we know that we're going to be in this strange environment and faculty are looking for rich content now. Even some faculty who were not that interested in engaging with the museum before are like looking for content that could be related to what they want. And we're starting to, we are now focusing on the fall, right? So we are focusing on what do we have coming in the fall? How can we create a menu of content, right? So, and I do, I would love to be optimistic about this, but I also think that the optimistic scenario is already a difficult one, right? And so we need to be planning now, as John has articulated, to like, where can we start to dial back? Can we do that now so that we are actually making these adjustments, not when they are required and I have a short amount of time to do them, but because I have really thought through those decisions in advance. And I'm just basically looking at, lots of different scenarios about what that might look like. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole in any one of them, but I want to be prepared for it looks like X or it looks like Y, or we have to dial back total budget by a certain percentage, or it is, whatever that looks like. And now I feel like the university has made its move for the time being. And so this is the period where we get to plan. Right.
And we've had a similar plan announced but not implemented, and they're tiering it, and it's also very progressive. The people at the bottom of the pay scale get no pay reduction. They keep their
oh, that's great,
earning, and then the higher up you go, the larger the cut is, which is exactly as it should be.
Yeah.
And we assume that something like that is coming. We don't know what else might be coming.
I mean, you both have been wonderful, and this has been so interesting. I've learned so much. I really appreciate it. I would like you to just step back for one moment and in conclusion, just say, so how have you really, I mean, what has it done to your thinking about all of these issues? Has it changed your position on certain things, or are you thinking about it, or has it always been something you've been thinking about? I'm just so curious about what big difference for you all. And John, let's start with you. Is there a big difference in your thinking?
I think one thing it's reinforced is, and our provost was talking about this the other day, if you're in a big research university, you have an incredible amount of brain power around you that can deal with things like this. And so our people at University of Oregon are involved in creating new testing and ways to sterilize masks for the whole Eugene, this part of the area of this region of Oregon, the whole community, Lane County. We have technology capacities to understand how to plan and how to work once students come back on campus. And it's amped up even more the sense of what a privilege it is to work in this kind of environment with so many people who are just committed to mission and to people and to education. And so, and our staff has responded brilliantly at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art. I mean, I've been overwhelmed at the spirit and the creativity and the productivity of my colleagues in this moment. It's as tough as it is. It's just reinforced that we're lucky to get to do this work in this kind of a place.
Thank you, Amy. Last word.
Yeah, thank you. I have been. It has been very clarifying for me, this whole situation about why it is important to be an art museum nested within a big research university. And going back to what comments I said earlier about our ability to pilot things and be nimble. And now we are being challenged to really demonstrate how valuable we can be. That's a great challenge, actually. I'm not afraid of that challenge. That's actually really invigorating to me. And I feel like we're really just starting, right? Like because we haven't, no matter how long it feels like we've been at home, we actually haven't been doing this for that long yet.
In this 10 years, really?
A frightening
And
thought, Amy.
I know. Oh my goodness. And so I have also been really just gratified to see the kind of creativity that is going into um, the thinking from the staff at the museum. And I have started to be really clear. There are just some things that are going to fall away for a while because we actually need to be really focused. During, I think not just during this period, but like using this period as a way of sort of like letting some things go that we had accumulated over time or whatever it is. And really, I'll also say just one of the things that's been really amazing to watch is that because I report to the provost of the university, I've been in conversations that I don't know if every other museum director at other universities is in, where the people who are actually standing up, right, a giant teaching and learning, distance learning environment in 3 weeks, right, are people that I'm actually like watching do this. And that kind of the kind of creativity and smarts and collaboration and kind of coming together is really inspiring. And it's the kind of thing that I feel like, you know, now I can like see how the museum can start plugging into these spaces
Right.
and just really getting the staff focused on how can we do that in a way that is really engaging and adds value, and that will have a long tail.
So Amy Gilman of the Chazen Museum of Art and John Weber of the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art at the University of Oregon, I want to thank you both so much for taking this time. It's great.